They had not been at the table long. In fact, they had hardly reached the third cake when there came another louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the Hobbit, and he went to the door. "So, you've got here at last." That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time, but it was not Gandalf. Instead, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he'd been invited. "I see they've begun to arrive already," he said, when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and "Balin, at your service," he said, with his hand on his breast. Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but they had already begun to arrive had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty and he stuck to it however painful. He might have to go without. "Come along and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. "A little beer would suit me better, if it's all the same with you, my good sir," said Balin, with the white beard. "But I wouldn't mind some cake, seed cake, if you have any." "Lots," Bilbo found himself answering. To his own surprise, he found himself scuttling off too to the cellar to fill a pint beer mug, and then to a pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked the afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, when loud came a ring at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf was certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarfs, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards, and each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped as soon as the door began to open. Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarfs?" he said. "Killy, at your service," said the one. "And Filly," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin are already here, I see," said Killy. "Let us join the throng." "Throng?" thought Bilbo Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits, and have a drink." He had only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarfs sat around the table and talked about mines and gold and troubles with goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he did not understand, did not want to, for they sounded much too adventurous. When, ding-dong-a-ling-dang, his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door," he said, blinking. "Some 4, I should say by the sound," said Filly. "Besides, we saw them coming up behind us, in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall, put his head in his hands, and wondered what had happened, and what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay for supper. Then the bell rang again louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all, it was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside and bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dori, Nori, Ori, Oin, and Gloin were their names. And very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, some for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been set in the hearth. The sea cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, when there came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat on the Hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewildered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he ever remembered. He pulled open the door with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarfs! 4 more! And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent in the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he had put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It's not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a pop gun. Let me introduce Biffa, Boffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin." "Achas Savas," said Biffa, Boffer, and Bomber, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a long silver tassel. This last one belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Biffa, Boffer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin indeed was very haughty, and said nothing about service. But poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray, don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Biffa. "And mince pies, and cheese," said Boffer. "And pork pie, and salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes, and more ale, and coffee, if you don't mind," called the other dwarfs through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him as the hobbits stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much about the inside of my larders as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether the most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he had got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks, glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. "Confusticate and be bother these dwarfs," he said aloud. "Why don't they come and lend a hand?" Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them. And before he could say knife, they had whisked the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything fresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarfs all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if it was all perfectly ordinary and not in the least an adventure. The dwarfs ate, and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you will all stay for supper?" he said, in his politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin. "And after? We shan't get through the business till late. And we must have some music first. Now, to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarfs, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top, with one hand, while the hobbit ran after them, almost squeaking with fright. "Please be careful, and please don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarfs only started to sing. "Blunt the knives, bend the forks, smash the bottles and burn the corks, chip the glasses and crack the plates. That's what Bilbo Baggins is. Cut the cloth, trail the fat, leave the bones on the bedroom mat. Pour the milk on the pantry floor, splash the wine on every door. Dump the crooks in the boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole. When they're finished they are whole, send them down the hall to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates, so carefully, carefully with the plates." And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was clean and put away safe, as quick as lightning, while the hobbit was turning around and round in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went, up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling. But wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe straight through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover over the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already. In the dim light, it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings. And then he blushed to think how proud he had been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he had sent up the wind over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Killy and Filly rushed for their bags and brought back little fiddles. Dory, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffa and Boffa went out too, and came back with clarinets that they had left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine on the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with violas, as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from the hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April. And still they played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one and then another began to sing as they played, deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes. And this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountain cold, to dungeons deep and cabins old, we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The fires were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. As they sang, the Hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning, by magic moving through him, a fierce and jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something Tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, explore the caverns, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up, probably someone lighting a wood fire. He thought of plundering dragons settling in his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames, and he shuddered. And very quickly he was plain Mr. Baggins of Bag End, Underhill again.